One of the presentations was looking kind of at the long-term, some of the extension data from Fingolimod from the pivotal clinical trials, and looking at how patients did over long haul. Some of the early data was presented in terms of ACROSS, which is the 10-year follow-up of the initial phase 2 trial. One of the things is to follow the group out and see how they do. So, part of it is efficacy. So we're finding that the people that were extended out had very low rates in terms of their relapse rates were still very low. And then we also found very little change in disability of people that were continuously on treatment. So that's important. So efficacy long term, is it still working for people? And the other thing is clearly safety. So we want to make sure that there's no major safety issues for people on continuous treatment. And we saw that people that were in continuous treatment with Fingolimod, more than 8 years exposure to Fingolimod, had less likely to progress to secondary progressive MS. And so very low percentages. And then if you look at the people that were not on continuous, they still had a low percentage, but it was statistically significant in favor of the people that were treated for the most amount of time. The safety issues that have shown up in post-marketing are pretty much the same things we saw in clinical trials in terms of slowing the heart rate down, rare, not very common macular edema, occasional macular edema. And then more concerning, there's been some cases of opportunistic infections. The two that have stood out is there's been 6 cases of PML out of over 155,000 people treated. So 1 in about 26,000, so pretty darn rare. And there's been some cases of cryptococcal meningitis as well. So, that's always important as the drug has been out there for in the United States, we're about 6 years out, so we want to make sure that we're doing ongoing monitoring and to make sure it's safe for our patients. No, not necessarily. So if we look at PML, it's with Fingolimod, it's somewhere between 30 months and 54 months of exposure. The good news is now we have 62,000 people that have been treated for more than 2 years. So some of our disease-modifying medications, including the other orals, were later to the market. So we don't have that many patients that have been exposed to that many years. Well, we've seen PML now with a few of the different agents. The way Fingolimod works is it traps certain lymphocytes within the lymph nodes. And so certain types. Now, the effector lymphocytes, the type of lymphocytes that fight infection, are still in your tissue. And only 2% of lymphocytes circulate through the circulation. So naive T cells and certain types of memory T cells are in the lymph nodes, are trapped in the lymph nodes. But effector lymphocytes who fight infections are still out in the periphery. So it may be that you're just a little more susceptible, but pretty rare. The story with natalizumab is natalizumab prevents the antibodies from crossing. It's basically an antibody that prevents the lymphocytes from crossing into the central nervous system. So there may be an inability to clear specific infections. But the only one that's really shown up is the main one has been PML. I mean, it's always true when you use a new mechanism of action. With Copaxone, though, is another one. Glutarin acetate's been around for a long time now. We're a 20-year anniversary on the market, so we have long-term safety and experience with that. But in some of the drugs, for example, if we think about Aubagio, teriflunomide is really a derivative of leflunomide. Of leflunomide, which is an old drug that's been around for rheumatoid arthritis since 1998. And leflunomide 20 milligrams is converted into 14 milligrams of teriflunomide. So rheumatoid arthritis patients have been floating out there. If you measure one patient on a drug for 1 year, there was a 2 million patient year exposure. So sometimes it's always not necessarily a new drug. We'll have a new drug coming out, hopefully for relapsing and primary progressive MS, ocrelizumab. And so that has a B-cell mechanism of action, B-cell depleter, which is similar new generation of rituximab. So again, sometimes these mechanisms have been studied in other disease states. Definitely, Gilenya being an S1P inhibitor is is a new mechanism. We're going to see the data in about a half an hour here on siponimod, which is a new generation, more selective S1P inhibitor. And I think it's pretty exciting because we're going to see the first positive data in secondary progressive MS hopefully soon, and see the full data set. We just have the top line data at this point. We're continuing to move on all fronts. I think probably the most exciting, one of the exciting aspects for this Congress meeting is looking at remyelination. And so we are, personally, I've been working with Corda Therapeutics on a medication called rhIgM22, which is a remyelinating antibody. So we've been doing phase 1 clinical trials on that. So we're working to really try to see if we can restore the function in people with MS. So we're really kind of doing safety studies with that. It was interesting, Synergy was presented, which is looking at anti-LINGO-1 antibodies, and although it didn't work at the highest dose, the more moderate doses seem to have some benefit. So, which is a remyelinating antibody that was studied in phase 2 clinical trials. So we'll see how Biogen moves forward, and with that, it seems there's some signal in people that were younger and still have relapsing forms of disease as opposed to older patients, secondary progressive. So we'll see if that works. But remyelination is definitely a big push.